A good productivity phone that doesn't break the bank? Let's go to work. Phones are not one thing. Rather than go off on a tangent in this video, I'm just gonna point to a video I shot years ago. Please check that out if you haven't already. We all caught up on different phone types. Great, TCL is filling a spot left open by LG. What if you want a little more control over getting work done and you don't want to spend a lot? The TCL Stylus 5G walks into that spot, ready to play. All right, cutting to the chase with a little of the conclusion up front, this is a terrific productivity bang for buck. It's a nice big screen, solid mid-pack performance. There's some decent cameras, or I should say decent camera on the back, and we get really good battery life. I think it's a little disingenuous to hype up premium expensive phones and talk about them in terms of trade-in deals and sales while ignoring those same deals on inexpensive phones. Full MSRP for this Stylus is $250. It is very easy to get this phone and not spend $250. Probably not have to spend anything. So when we take a free on contract into consideration, a lot of the compromises for this phone make sense. Looking at the design, it's simple and utilitarian. I think this looks a lot nicer than some of the other holographic or jewel tone phones TCL has played with in the past, because this is a phone for work. It looks like it does the work. Flat sides, and there's like a texture strip that helps it feel more secure in your hand. It gives it a little bit of extra grip. And I'm so happy to have this power button fingerprint sensor. It's more practical and more responsive. We do not want, especially at this price point, do not want a cheap in-display optical sensor for unlocking our phones. Plus, this phone has stereo speakers. They're not perfectly balanced. The earpiece is a little thinner than the bottom speaker, but this sounds pretty good at arm's length for a free on contract phone. The screen is a respectable LCD. It's decently bright and it's got good visibility in daylight, even though it's not a fancy OLED or a high refresh rate display. TCL is pretty solid at screen tech. And for an inexpensive LCD, I think we're in good shape for streaming video. We get a bunch of options to tune our video playback, punch up the color, punch up the saturation, or reduce color if we want a tamer reading mode or an eye comfort mode. I mean, this is TCL, they make TVs, they put a lot of these same settings into their phones. Considering this price point, I mean, honestly, the thing I'm most disappointed in with this hardware is the haptic motor. It's got a decent amount of power to it, but it's that really gross feeling fuzz, 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 fuzz kind of response. And I have to turn it off because there's just enough of that fuzz delay that it kind of interrupts. I find I make more typing mistakes because of the feedback. Yeah, what is pretty great though is the SoC on tap. We're looking at a Dimensity 700, where phones like the Stylo 6 were using lower end chipsets, something like a Helio P35, and a number of newer 5G solutions are using Snapdragon 480s to hit those lower price points. The Dimensity 700 is solid mid-ranger fare. This is a phone likely free on contract that's pretty close to the performance of a Pixel 5a or the new Moto G stylus. We shouldn't be putting a lot of stock into these synthetic benchmark scores, so trying to quantify what that means, we get a fair amount of horsepower, and this is going to be a decently speedy phone throughout using it throughout the UI, much better than we were for like the Stylo 6 generation of devices, but it means you absolutely will still encounter stutters on heavy lifting, especially when you're trying to multitask aggressively. When trying to put this thing to work, I run a pretty beefy file compression test just to see what each of these phones can do, especially this is a little bit more CPU bound. First, we should just celebrate that the TCL can complete a beefy PC style file compression test. I mean, it doesn't finish the test fast, but we shouldn't be surprised that a more expensive phone will finish a test like this even faster. I mean, you can take a phone like the Galaxy S22 at 3 times the MSRP of this stylus, 3 times more expensive, not quite twice as fast. And ditto my really beefy photo processing test. We go through 200 RAW files. A phone like the OnePlus 10 Pro is 3.5 times more expensive, but it's not quite twice as fast completing the same tasks. The TCL can finish off podcast renders faster than I thought it might, landing an hour of finished audio in under 2.5 minutes. Sure, a $1,000 phone will get you closer to a minute 20, maybe a minute 15, so you'd be 4 times more expensive, but not 4 times faster. When we're talking about entry-level devices, I think one of the things we're always going to have some issues with is going to be imaging, what the camera is capable of and what kind of image data, a more mid-ranger SoC can process. This phone doesn't support 4K video recording, and it's not gonna edit or render 4K video in PowerDirector or KineMaster. Actually, I should strike that. This is a 4K video file, so we can edit 4K, but it's the advantage of a Snapdragon 700 is that it will render 4K. Here, we're gonna be stuck at rendering at 720p. I think it's a fair question to ask. Do you expect to be editing and rendering 4K video from your phone, especially from your free on-contract phone? Or are you gonna be okay taking some, 1080p and 4K video samples and smashing them down to 720p files for social media? I think at this MSRP, we can still call this a workhorse phone and only spit out 720p video renders. We have no expectations this is gonna be a gaming powerhouse. We've got plenty of horsepower though to tackle fun arcadey titles. And even more aggressive games are gonna be in okay shape if you can turn down some of the graphic settings. We're crossing that threshold where MSRP for this performance has been cut in half from about 2 years ago. Now the software on tap is definitely customized. There's a lot that goes into stylus support that Android doesn't cover natively. But I do like some of these UI tweaks that TCL has made to Android 12. Like the notification shade, combining a mix of smaller and larger toggles. It looks like something straight out of the Windows Phone playbook, which, I'm always gonna be a fan of big blocky squares and rectangles. And this is really subtle, but I like having clearer defined. This is better conveyance for tools like floating window or split screen multitasking. And of course, the crown jewel feature is the stylus. It's the name of the phone. This is not gonna be a Note competitor for cheap. This is a simple pen. It doesn't have like tilt, angle, or pressure sensitivity. So in an art app, you've got to control the brush, the thickness, all of that on your own. But there is very good palm and finger rejection. So when I'm scribbling away on the pen, the phone notices that I'm using the pen and it doesn't allow my finger to mess up what my pen is drawing, except for when I tap a menu key like that. But as soon as you pull the pen out of the silo, you get this list of quick shortcuts right at the top, Nebo for TCL. This is a note-taking app that can do character recognition. It's got lots of really cool tools to help you like split up text or translate handwriting into more readable characters than my terrible handwriting that I'm not gonna subject you to right now. But all of these other actions, you've got just regular handwritten notes, you can screenshot doodles, signing documents, a pop-up magnifying window, really just handy for accessibility. That's one of the nice things about using stylus-enabled devices is it gives us a completely different work method for people who might not be comfortable or might prefer something more than just all touchscreen. This is actually really smooth magnifying performance. I don't know if folks remember my videos from the Velvet, which had a similar feature, and it had stylus support. It wasn't quite as smooth as what this TCL is showing right there. We're not gonna have any of the fancy features like on a Galaxy Note. This isn't wirelessly connected to the phone, so you can't use it as like a remote shutter for your camera or anything fun like that. This is daily driver pen input with a nicely designed pen. This is the other thing I really like. It's not just a round stick. This is a well-built pointing tool. And it has a magnetic silo. So when we put it back in the phone, it slides and then the phone will kind of grab it with magnets. So there's one, and then you push past and it slots right in. All right, switching gears though, the cameras on the phone, the main camera is pretty good. I'd say from the original 10 series of TCL, this is probably where we've seen the most improvement on their phones. We're keeping expectations in check that the photos and videos are solid It's a good point and shoot camera, good 1080p video, surprisingly decent image stabilization, and a few fun features that you can kind of play with. There is also a manual mode if you want a bit more control, but it won't put out RAW files. The main sensor is pretty good. The ultra wide is okay, and I don't see many folks using the macro. At some point, I just hope companies will start leaving off the really cheap additional camera sensors. Like, this is done just so that it looks like you've got an impressive array of multiple cameras on the back. You're really only going to use 2 of these things. But in terms of software, the main omission, I wish there was a good document scanning mode. I mean, there are third-party apps you can install, but I want it in the main camera app. As one of the things that would fit this phone. I can't imagine a bunch of people are out there taking their inexpensive work phone out to do fancy light paintings and light tracings, but a good chunk of potential stylus-enabled phone customers might want a document scanner. All right, landing at prices this low, we used to be concerned about network and radio management. The Stylus falls behind more powerful mid-rangers, but we'd be comparing against phones costing at least $150 more. This can't quite max out my home broadband connection consistently. See, like getting around 460, I can usually peak around 500, but it has no issues, obviously, arriving at fast downloads on my Wi-Fi router, even without proper Wi-Fi 6 support. Network coverage in my neighborhood has been decent for 5G, where again, this will fall behind more premium phones. And especially as we're managing sort of the 4G to 5G transitions in a lot of neighborhoods, I'd say LTE support was above the TCL 30V, but the TCL 30V, of course, has support for the ultra-fast Verizon 5G. You just gotta kind of know what network you're gonna be playing on. I don't really have many concerns for the daily driver stuff. I think you're in for good support, good network coverage, and good radio reception. And that brings us to the battery, and we're in really good shape. This has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery paired with a decent mid-ranger SoC, which means we're gonna get very good runtime. This won't be the battery champ of the year, but a little power management consideration from the user, and it should be good for 2 days on a single charge. You just have to plan ahead a little, as the fastest charging on tap is 18 watts. I've definitely been spoiled by more expensive phones with crazy fast charging systems of late, but I want to point this out because this is a really thin box. Like, if we're worried about how many phones we can ship, saving the environment from wasteful packaging, in the box, we not only get a cable, we don't get a case or a screen protector. I really do wish we had those, but we still get the 18-watt charger in the box. It's really hard for me to try and anticipate what sort of screen on time this phone might be able to deliver, because this is a phone that I think will be used harder than its price tag would usually indicate. People who enjoy phones like this use them because the tools are a little better and they can multitask a little easier. Now, this shouldn't be graded against an entry-level communicator phone like the TCL 30. This is an entry-level productivity phone. These are different animals. So that's about where we should try to wrap this up. The TCL Stylus 5G is a refreshing entry in this space. Like I said at the top, it definitely gets a positive recommendation from me for folks who want good tools to get work done. And we can fairly point out that software support from TCL will likely be shorter. I mean, just checking right now for this video, I have a Google Play services update. I think, again, as techies, we need to be good helpers for our family and friends and make sure the people we care about, they are keeping their phones up to date. When we point out mid-rangers that have guaranteed longer software support, they come with much higher price tags. The person shopping in this tier, an entry-level to free on-contract style phones, I don't know that it's always reasonable to say, well, just spend twice as much to get another year or 2 of OS updates. And those updates don't always guarantee better performance. I really feel TCL is kind of an underrated brand. We're gonna see them showing up a lot in more of the carrier stores, especially the lower cost carriers. But even through painful component shortages and distribution issues, they've managed to maintain carrier relationships in the USA. Versions of these phones showing up at T-Mobile and Verizon. The final point to wrap this up on, this is a solid option to save some cash and still get a high degree of work done on the go with a little room for the fun stuff too. So I will, of course, leave some links down below where you can find more information on TCL, the Stylus 5G, the carriers that this phone is going to be showing up on. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. All the support lately has been absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough. Those folks who are checking out the links under my description, maybe you're hitting my home site, SomeGadgetGuy.com, or maybe you're joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list is a list of the coolest tech pals in the multiverse, so I hope you'll check them out. I'm actually going to be watching some Doctor Strange later tonight, so you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, not so much on the Facebooks or the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next review.